Did you really?
That weekend, yeah.
4,000.
4,000. So anyway, you know, lesson number one, if you've got a story with that kind of impact, it is just, you have to find some way to tell the story one time, one place, or
Right.
you'll have a train wreck on your hands.
Exactly.
And we were able to do that. I think another lesson, you inferred this earlier, but my boss, Charles Brown, but the whole top management of AT&T and the board of directors, what we were able to do was really a credit to the public relations department, not to me personally, but to the PR department, that we presented a plan to announce that thing to the whole top management, all the CEOs of the Bell companies, to our own board of directors. And, you know, thinking back on it later, I thought to myself, that's that's amazing that no one said, you're not going to bring in an agency to do this, or tell me that again, I don't like that, you know, and blah, blah, blah. They all just said, great plan, you know. And that was, so, and the third thing I think, Larry, is, well, I did the plan in 2 days because of the danger of leaks. At least I had an opportunity to think it through. I mean, it didn't come flying in over the transom,
right,
as it so often happens to chief public relations officers, that they don't know till the last minute. I was in on it from the first minute, and that made a huge difference. And we were also able to mobilize not only the chairman of the board as the principal spokesperson, but we were fortunate that we had a president, Bill Ellinghaus, you know him well,
right,
and two vice chairs who were, you know, very polished with the news media.
right.
I mean, they were good at it. And so I was able to give them the talking points. And so in fielding those, and by the way, we all lived in our office building through that whole weekend. So it was impressive to a reporter who calls in, and we say, do you want to talk to Charlie Brown? Hang on a minute. Press the button.
Right.
He's on the line. And Bill Ellinghaus and whatnot. So we had 4 really good authoritative spokesmen, and of course all the rest of us ink-stained wretches in the PR department who could, you know, who could handle whatever came in. And we did augment our media relations group by handpicking people elsewhere, and who might have been on jobs elsewhere in the public relations department, but had plenty of experience. So we were able to get through that weekend. The last thing, in anticipating this train wreck or this media frenzy, I wrote an ad, a full-page ad, to run in the morning papers the next day, all the metropolitan papers in the United States. And I did that for fear that the story would not come out as clearly and as accurately as it did. And we hired different financial print shops in New York City and gave them each a paragraph or 2 of the ad, so no one ever saw
Put it together.
the whole ad. And then we had individuals get on airplanes and fly out to the markets and deliver the ad to the newspapers. Well, it turned out the reporters got it right and got it straight, and that really was superfluous. The other thing that I think we did, maybe not everybody who will ever listen to this will have the same thing, but in a company that has a lot of different divisions and business units and whatnot, we called the presidents of the Bell companies into New York, or New Jersey actually, and I took them through the plan, and Howard Treenham took them through the steps in the courthouse, and I asked each of them, as soon as we had made the announcement, to have their own press conference in their headquarters city, because they had the employees. They were theirs, not ours.
Sure.
They had the customers. They were not AT&T headquarters customers. They were the Bell companies. And with but one exception, not one of those CEOs freelanced or made a boo-boo. I sent them a packet by courier the night before with everything they needed for a press conference, and they had the conferences I think noon the next day. And that helped a lot because they were talking to their customers, they were talking to their employees,
Right.
and they were talking to the news media that covered their company. And I think that sometimes we forget to do, I don't know whether it was me who thought of that or somebody else, but sometimes we forget thinking, well, the whole show is the chairman of the board.
Yeah.
Well, it's not.
It isn't.
If you're a big company with a lot of people scattered all over the place, employees and customers, it's important to have the person they look to as the head guy, you know, not the chairman of the board of the holding company.
Ed, before we jump to the beginning of the Page Society, which I want your version of it, let's give a capsule summary of Page. He didn't finish his career at AT&T. He went on to other things, and he became a counselor and to the White House.
Yes.
Truman, I think he worked closely with.
He, this is probably, I'm chastised from time to time for saying this, but or pointing this out like it's a great triumph. But the fact of the matter is that he was called down to the White House to write the announcement about the atomic bomb. But he,
The dropping of the atomic bomb in Nagasaki.
Truman's explanation,
Hiroshima,
but he was a a familiar figure under
Yeah.
many presidents at the White House as a free advisor.
Right.
Like every White House has its kitchen cabinet, as they
Sure.
say. And he was one of those people. He did, when he took his retirement at AT&T, he had been on the board since sometime in the early 30s, I think. So he remained on the board for a couple of years, and did some for-hire counseling. He also was on the boards of 3 other corporations. Chase Manhattan Bank was one of them. So he was well known in the corporate world, and he also had for a guy that made C's at Gentleman C's at Harvard, he was very interested in education.
Yeah.
And was very much involved with Teachers College at Columbia University and with Columbia itself. So
Yeah.
so he had a wide-ranging
Very
intellect
career, but it was
yeah.
pretty much channeled in policy, writing, and
Yeah. He was the go-to guy. He was the
Right.
wise man. you
Yeah.
know.
yeah. Ed, the Page Society, the Arthur Page Society, did not get formed until the mid-'80s. I want to know, and I'm sure our viewers do, how that came about. Page had long since left AT&T.
Yeah.
What was the motivation? What was the driving force and the inspiration that in the mid-'80s
Yeah.
prompted you and I believe Jack Coton
Yes.
and a few others to form the Page Society?
Yeah. Well, let me take one small step backward from that. One of my early bosses is the one who introduced me to Arthur Page. He had some of his letters and memos and whatnot, and I thought, aha, this is golden stuff. I mean, all these things that we do around here in the name of public relations, which I hadn't given any thought to who thought them up or where they came from. Suddenly I find out there's a person, and his name is Arthur Page, and he instituted most of these things. So then I started looking for more Page writings, and began to collect them, you know, myself. And as the word got around I was doing this, this was very early in my career, but people would send me stuff, you know, that they had in their personal files and whatnot. So somewhere, I think it was about the time that I was vice president of Illinois Bell in Chicago, and I had been making many talks to the public relations department and in management meetings out in Chicago about Arthur Page, and he was as much a mystery to other people. I mean, he had come and gone, and he had institutionalized all this stuff that we were doing, but very few people were around who really knew there was such a guy. So I thought, you know, I think we need a patron saint, you know, so let's resurrect Page. And so Jack Coton was working with me in Chicago at the time, and we instituted Arthur Page Awards in different categories, annual awards for employees in the PR department who did a job that was an excellent reflection of Page principles, as they came to be called. So that was number one. And then when I moved from that job to the head job at AT&T, we made that a national award. So okay, so we had something going in the name of Arthur Page. At the time of the breakup, the Bell breakup, the last meeting that we had it was an old tradition of the vice president's public relations of all the major Bell companies came together in a conference sponsored by the AT&T vice president. So one of the people in that conference, you know, said, you know, this is a sad day. You know, this is the last time we'll be together. So what say we form an Arthur Page Society? Now what he had in mind was someplace to go play golf and tell, you know, lie to each other, tell stories and whatnot. So so this particular fellow, he incorporated, I mean with the consent of everybody, but he incorporated a Page Society. And that's kind of what it was.
That's how it got started.
As a Bell Alumni Association. But it was Jack Coton who was the first to recognize and say persistently, this has no future. What there is a need for is an organization for chief public relations officers who view their jobs as Arthur Page did his, as counselors.
From various companies.
And then various companies. So then with probably more chutzpah than reality would have suggested, we reincorporated it and opened the membership up. And that led me to one Lawrence G. Foster to say that to give this outfit any credibility, we need a president of the Page Society who's not a former Bell Telephone guy. And you generously agreed. And that's what turned the big corner for the Page Society, and it lost its beginnings as an alumni association and became a serious.
Yeah, that took place. You made your sale, and I wasn't too reluctant because I recognized the importance of the Page Society, or what it could be.
Yeah, and we knew each other well.
And we knew each other well. You're a tough guy to turn down anyway. But 90...
Vice versa. That works the other way too.
The other way, right, exactly. 90 to 92, those 2 years, and what we did is we went out and we went to the top PR people in the country and said, the Arthur Page Society was born and bred in the Bell system, but now we're expanding it nationally and opening it up to other companies. Yeah. And would you join and be a part of it? I can't remember a single turnout. the top people in the country in our business, public relations, wanted to be a part of it.
Yeah. There was nothing, there's still nothing quite like it exists. As you know, there was another organization that you were also president of that was a once-a-year conference among
Right.
top PR people. It's called the Public Relations Seminar, and you were also president of that.
No,
But
actually,
you were not.
I wasn't. No, I headed Wiseman in New York,
That's
but not
yeah,
not
not the seminar.
seminar.
Well, see what happens to an old man's brain. I don't remember everything accurately. Anyway, I think it was not. If Larry Foster called you up and said you ought to join the Page Society, you know, but a lot of people said, well, if he thinks it's good, I ought to join. But the other part, I think, was that it does fill a need for many, not all, of the chief public relations officers, more so than the seminar
No
or
question.
in any other organization,
No
because
question.
it operates, it's issues focused,
Right.
and it operates at the intersection of the CEO's job and the chief public relations officer's job. That's the focus of
Right.
of the conferences.
And it has become over the years the most prestigious public relations organization in the country.
Yep. Yeah.
With now I think 330 senior level people, and with a program that, you know, and boggles my mind the programs that they have been able to put together. When what we were doing is out selling people to join, they have created a very sophisticated agenda.
Absolutely. I mean, for most senior PR people, it's a must be there organization.
Let me jump quickly to another subject, values, the subject of integrity, responsibility, truth-telling, and give me your view of what is needed in those areas. And I know here at the Page Center, which is why we're gathering at Penn State at this time, the board of the Page Center, trying to figure out how best to carry out our responsibility and to elevate the Page Center to an even higher standard. But give me off-the-cuff thoughts about values, responsibility, integrity. What do you think about when you focus on those issues?
Well, I'm going to come at that question from a couple of different angles. One is that public relations as a skill set, if you want to call it that, has grown enormously, and it has morphed into communications, communicator. And I think my idea of integrity and values and whatnot has to do with the counseling function, not as the resident saint, for goodness sakes,
No.
but to be in that policy-making loop that includes the communications of policy, but also the making of policy. So I think, for my mind, the big role that the communication school at Penn State is going to play in the locating the Page Center here is that I think a prestigious academic institution that gives you great leverage and gives you the right to talk about integrity and ethics. And so I think that the center here at Penn State, the Page Center, can be enormously influential. Now, as to what is integrity, and how do you do it in the business world and that sort of thing, which I hope will be the output. The how-tos will come out of the Page Center as well. But to my mind, it's pretty easy to think in terms of some old-fashioned horse sense. Companies that do right do better. I mean, that's been documented, through almost a century now, and it's not, when I say do better, meaning their bottom line. They make money for the share owners, and they do it consistently, which is really important, and not the peaks and valleys. So that's kind of a glib way to say it, that the ones who do right do better, but it's documented. The other thing is there's some simple rules, and they pretty much come out of the Page principles, but they're, other people have said them in other language and using other words. The new hot button, as you know, is transparency. Well, that had old-fashioned meanings, but it meant all business in a democratic society, blah, 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 Your customers, your share owners, your constituencies have a right to get an explanation of what you're doing when they want an explanation. So, what's so magic about that? And yet we have gotten away from it too much, I think, in modern times, where it's almost as though slickness of communications will pull you through, whether it's marketing or whether it's in PR. And we know it doesn't. It doesn't. You may get away with it for a little while, but sooner or later you're going to slip on a banana peel if it's not real. So it's telling the truth. It's being upfront with your employees, with your share owners. Employees, by the way, you know this from your J&J days, and I know this. The first people who know that the emperor has no clothes are the employees. And once they decide that,
it's downhill.
It's downhill, because they will let that be known to everybody. So if you're a company that employs a lot of people, it's very important, the integrity thing, the transparency thing, the upfront thing. Really, I think you build it off of your internal communications.
But the person in charge of public relations for the company, the person who has access to the chairman, they're in a wonderful position to be the reminder, to be the keeper of the principles that the company is striving for, right?
Yes, they are. Absolutely. And I think a friend of mine by the name of Larry Foster used to talk about that a lot, that the chief public relations officer, by whatever title, is the only one in the top echelon of senior management whose job it is to think like the CEO would think. The others, whether it's chief financial officer or chief marketing officer or whatever, are advocates, as they should be, of what they're doing. And you and I know that in some of the discussions, we called it the office of the chairman, but the executive committee, whatever. The problem in making bad decisions and the opportunity to make good decisions is not a matter that you got a bunch of crooks in the room who all want to do something bad. It isn't that you're trying to thrash out a strategy or a decision or a way to present a decision, And so it's not people sitting around a table trying to figure out how they can get by with something. It's people advocating different solutions to the same problem from their point of view. And the one person in the room who can be useful to the CEO is the Chief Public Relations Officer, because he or she is not invested in any of those advocacy positions at all. And also, as you know, and I certainly know, oftentimes the chairman needs someone in that room who will speak the unspeakable, you know, and say, you can't do that. You can't do that. Okay, it's going to cost us some money to not do that, or whatever the implications are. And the chairman, in many cases, he knew that all along. He just wanted somebody in the room to say it, and then he can say, well, I agree.
Ed, Cinda Kostiak and her associates put together some very interesting questions for this interview. One had to do with today's role of public relations executive as opposed to the way it was when you were reigning in your job at AT&T. Would you like to comment on that? There's been a lot of changes. So many have changed it to communications, and the advisor role has diminished. What's your view on that?
Well, I can give you impressions. Obviously, I'm retired, and so you perhaps can take what I say with a grain of salt, as we used to say. But first of all, the field of corporate public relations, business public relations, is clearly far, far more complex today than it ever was before, and continues to become more so. And that's had on the one side, I suppose it's good for jobs in the field and the kinds of work that you have an opportunity to do that wasn't there before. But the dark side of that, to me, is that it's distracting from what the core notions about public relations were in our day. So, in our predecessors, because it was much more the counseling function as really a continuing day-to-day job. And now you have marketing communications, and you have all kinds of communications. I'm waiting to see in the Wall Street Journal any day now. It's going to say somebody has been elected vice president blogs, and but you've got the whole internet stuff, the skills necessary to keep a fresh website or websites. So it's really stretched, but in the stretching, I think some of the core benefits, values, not as a moral thing, but values in terms of the corporation getting what it's paying for, are lost when the too many people in the public relations organization, including the chief, are spending too much time doing other things. Now, another piece that I think has made the job more difficult is, of course, in many companies, it's the globalization.
Right.
When you're trying to be a counselor in a cross-cultural environment, it probably can't be done without a lot of help or a lot of associate counselors. But in any case, and the customer base tends to be different. The CEO's travel schedule is double the monster it was when you and I were there. So I think to sum up my impressions is, yes, it's changed vastly. It continues to change. I want to see it come back with a little more emphasis on the counseling function, without without necessarily giving up some of these other functions. I do think in some PR departments there are too many functions that really don't need to be there. I mean, they're there because it makes a great looking organization chart, but it's not. Anybody else can do some of those things, or they could be done somewhere else. Also, the decentralization has been another problem for the CEO's advisor, by whatever title, because if you have these very large, discrete, and rather independent business units, and that really are in business for themselves. I mean, too much so. I always marveled at General Electric, that how could they do such a good job, which they have mainly done through the years of a coherent face to the public and a definable character. When you're building jet engines, you're building refrigerators,
right,
light bulbs, medical imaging, locomotives. That's quite a feat. Because those businesses really don't, for the most part, have any overlap. I mean, they're different industries, and yet the General Electric has been able to be GE.
So you have companies that have become infinitely more complex, and you have public relations vice presidents who have a lot of eggs in their basket, some of which probably shouldn't be there, because if you're going to sit on that basket and keep track of all that's going on, you don't really have time to spend with the CEO in an advisory capacity.
Yeah.
And then you have the situation of the CEO who might have been weaned away from the counseling and is either getting it elsewhere,
find someone else,
or not getting it, the counseling that he should.
Right.
Some of the major headline stories that we've all suffered through in recent years, you rarely find the public relations person having had a culpable role in those situations. Enron. Did you find it that way too?
Yes.
That they weren't among the
They weren't in the loop.
indictees, or
Right,
they
well,
weren't.
they weren't indicted. That's good.
Yeah, that's a positive.
But they weren't in the loop.
They weren't in the loop.
Yeah. And I just, another thing in talking about this basket of eggs that a chief PR officer has to deal with, and pulling that person away from the other job. The same executive that laid the one on me about this run like a mom and pop corporation. Another canny thing that he said to me in a whole different context, different situation. He said when he was then, in this episode, he was assistant to the chairman, which is a job when he retired that I took on in addition to the PR job. But he said, when people ask me what I do, he said, what I do, I'm paid to think about things the chairman of the board doesn't have time to think about. Meaning that the CEO is pulled and tugged here and there, and there are so many balls in the air, and there are potential problems down the road. And what he was saying is that I have the luxury of seeing the world through the lenses of a CEO, my boss, but I have the luxury of being able to think ahead about things that he needs to be aware of. And I'm not talking about crises, but just things that he needs to be aware of and plan for, and we plan for it together. And I thought that was a pretty good way to put it. So if you're you don't need to have a separate job, assistant chairman of the board. I'm not arguing for that, but if that's in the chief public relations officer's portfolio, and it should be, don't let it get crowded out, you know. And I think that's part of what happens, or has happened. And also, the CEO's job changed, and I'm happy to say now that I'm encouraged that it's sort of changing back again with some of the new breed CEOs. But what also happened along the way was that too many cases the CEO became the chief salesman to Wall Street.
Yes.
Every 90 days.
Yeah.
And
trying to meet the quarterly.
yes, yeah. And so the CEOs also got off the rails.
Right.
In many cases, and but as I said, I'm somewhat encouraged. Some of the new ones that have come in on the scene, some in the wake of scandals and some not, seem to be a different breed. That they're running the business, and therefore they are open to the kind of PR person that we've been talking about here, to help provide the counsel to run the business. I mean,
right.
These there are two. I probably shouldn't get into books, but there was about 3 years ago a wonderful book called Execution, written by the CEO of I guess it's Allied, what used to be Allied Corporation. Mm-hmm. It's Allied Bendix, is it, or something like that? And he straightened that company out one time, and then he retired, and it went off the rails, and they brought him back. And this book was the piece about that. And he said when I came back, he said everybody was rushing around going to conferences and meetings, and there were these big charts up on the walls and all these new opportunities. And he said, I looked at that and said, stop it. You know, we have a business plan. Yeah. Execute it. Yeah. Do it. Yeah. You know, and we'll change it when we need to. So what I see in some of the new ones, I'm thinking about the new CEO of Hewlett Packard, yeah. And others that are picking up on the fact that when you get too big in the head, when your salary is, or your compensation is what most people know about the company, you're headed for trouble. Yeah. And what you need are executives with a longer term view, and executives who know where they want to take the business, and it's not down to Wall Street, you know.
Right. And there's another aspect that we haven't touched on, and that is the personal relationship between a CEO and someone who is aspiring to be a counselor. And my advice on that would be, if you sense that the CEO doesn't really like you, or if you always seem to be on divergent path, it's time to look for another job. Ed,
by the way, just a footnote on that. The counselor, one piece of a good counselor's character, you have it, I think I had it, is humility. I mean, understand my job is different from the CEO's job.
Well, I always knew who was CEO, yeah. But I get low marks on humility, I'm afraid.